From an abundance of highly secure, top secret locations across South Texas, this is the Spurs Insider, the podcast rumored to be available for maybe a second round pick at the trade deadline. I am your host, Mike Finger, here with Express News sports editor Nick Talbot, Tom Ringo Orsborn, and the polarizing Jeff Mcdonald. We are one game into what I am told is the longest homestand in San Antonio Spurs history. What is the state of the local Cagers at this historic moment, Jeff Mcdonald?
Yeah, I think they're going to be in town longer than the defenders of the Alamo were. I think
that's pretty good.
I think they hopefully they'll have better luck. But
we need a fact check on that, by the way. I think it
was 13 days of glory, right?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I may be exaggerating.
And this homestand is how long?
Longer than that.
Okay.
But if you want to get pedantic, the defenders of the Alamo were here for longer than 13 days. Like, they didn't just show up and start fighting.
That's true. That's true.
But
there's going to be a history lesson on this podcast. That's what this podcast is.
But they came in kind of piecemeal, though, right? I mean, they weren't all. Yeah, it was kind of
right.
staggered.
Yeah. Davy Crockett did not come in at the same time as Jim Bowie.
And then Davy Crockett didn't want to come off the bench anymore, and he has to be traded.
Right.
They picked some guys off waivers. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jeff is really showing us what he does know already. He's trying to get that. He's trying to get that segment out of the way fast.
Well, three members of this podcast grew up with Texas history, and one is from, godforsaken Florida. So it's understandable that the boss here was not kind of raised and immersed in the culture of the Alamo and Sam Houston and the whole Texas Revolution. So this could be an educational podcast, not only for the listeners, but for our boss here, Nick Talbot, who I don't know, Nick, what was your impression of the Alamo before you moved to Texas?
Well, the first time I saw it was when I got here for the interview. So my impression of the Alamo before I moved here.
Yeah, just what
all I knew about was Davy Crockett and the stupid songs from the Disney stuff.
There you go.
So what was your reaction to seeing the Alamo in person for the first time?
Same as everyone else. That's it.
Yes, exactly. And also, I didn't understand why they put it downtown with all those other buildings.
It's much like it was weird. It was weird that they fought this next to a Fuddruckers,
Like, why didn't Santa Ana just put the armies on top of the embassy suites and just shoot down? Stupid. That's why it took 13 days.
We can cover this strategy for a long time. Much like Spud Webb. The Alamo was smaller in person. I don't know if that worked.
We're off to a great start today, by the way.
The Express News beat writers who covered it didn't get much mileage. It was just a hop, skip, and a jump away.
The old secure location, which we no longer use during these times, was not too far away from the Alamo. I can divulge that secret bit of information. In the shadows of the Alamo is where the old secret location was.
We used to broadcast from the Ripley's Believe It or Not.
That's exactly right. These 13 days of glory that are remaining for the local Cagers, it seems to me like this might be the last. Even though they're playing every other day, and I mean, with this week there's the Los Angeles Clippers that are coming in for back-to-back games, and this isn't an easy part of the schedule. It is the easiest part of the schedule that's left, pretty comfortably the easiest part of the schedule, and so
to go with the metaphor, it's their last stand. I think, like if they blow this 9-game homestand, it's going to be really hard to make it up with what's left.
Yeah,
you've got 9 games at home. Only 2 of the teams you play are above 500. Already kind of blew one to Charlotte the other day. If you kind of muddle your way through this homestand and don't build a cushion, those 17 out of 24 road games to finish the season might just crush you.
Right. And this, I mean, I don't want to overstate the desperation of this. They're 4 games above 500 now, which is probably better than anybody would have expected before the season started. They're not in a situation where they have to win every game at this homestand. But to your point, like it's if you don't make hay while the sun shines now, it's going to be rough the rest of the way. In terms, like it's probably way too early to be looking at standings, but with the new format of the NBA playoffs, they're going to get extra games if they're in the top 10. And they are now 4.5 games ahead of 11th place. It looks pretty good that they're going to get an extra game, but I think what they'd like to do.
If your only goal is to be in the top 10, they're looking pretty good still. If your goal is to get up to 6, or at least in the top 6, so you're avoiding the play-in shenanigans, you got to do something with this homestand. Because I think if you don't,
that's kind of the catch. That's kind of the catch of this new format in that there's not a huge difference between finishing the regular season 7th and finishing 10th. In both of those situations, you have to play extra games. The 7th seed is better than the 10th because you just have to win one of those extra games. But still, every seed, and we'll review this again for the viewers, and I know they're not viewers, they're only listeners, but I think they can imagine us in their mind's eye. Jeff with his Polar Pop, Ringo with his salmon mug, which I know he has. To review this, the 7th place team plays the 8th place team in one game at the end of the season. And the winner of that gets the 7th seed. The loser of that goes on to play the winner of the 9-10 game for the 8th seed. So if you're placing a bet right now, the Spurs are going to be involved in that somehow. I think the only way they're not is if they lose a whole bunch of games to drop to 11th, which seems unlikely, or if they win a whole bunch of games to move up to 6th. So
my favorite part of the pregame portion of the broadcast before the Charlotte game was Sean Elliott, God bless him. I mean, we know what those broadcasters' marching orders are. You know, they've got to be optimistic and sunshine pumping. But he was wondering aloud, you know, do you even want to pass the Lakers into 4th and 5th and then have to play them in the first round of the playoffs? Like that's
great.
That was my favorite part of the whole thing.
And that's not totally out. I mean, that's kind of totally outrageous, but it's not totally outrageous that the Spurs could finish 4th or 5th.
Do we even want to get to 4th?
Right. But yes, you want to get to 4th or 5th. That's better than 7th or 8th.
I don't think they're going to have to worry about it. I don't.
What did you guys think of not only the opener to this homestand against the Hornets, but what looked like a pretty imposing road trip last week, where there were 5 games in however many days, 8 days, 7, 8 days. The road trip turned out pretty well, all things considered, don't you think?
Who should talk? We can't see each other, so you should talk.
Go ahead. Tom's the sunshine guy. I think he should be the optimistic guy here.
It was bookend with the 2 losses to title contenders, and in between you had wins over Detroit, Chicago, and Cleveland. So it went, as well as could be expected. And I guess the biggest bright spot was seeing what Keldon Johnson, still, his stock is rising continuously with that massive double-double, 2020 double-double he had. And then
the Chicago game was pretty incredible.
Yeah.
In terms of the rally.
Yeah. So, it went as well as could be expected. And then the Milwaukee game was impressive. They had everything stacked against them in that game. Milwaukee, 2 days rest, Spurs playing their 5th and 7. They were shorthanded with Patty Mills and DeJounte Murray out for rest, on and on and on, but they gave it a great go. And
as a student of analytics and as someone who totally buys into that line of thinking, I realize rationally that the concept of the hot hand is kind of imagined, and that there's really no such thing when you get down to it in NBA games of momentum. But Lonnie Walker repeatedly attempts to disprove that. Like the game that he had against the Bucks, where our friend Sean Elliott kept saying it over and over again, get him the ball. When he gets in zones like that, it's pretty impressive. And I don't think he's a guy you rely on night after night to be your leading scorer, even your second leading scorer. But it's cool to see, a variety of these different players they have coming up and kind of growing into their roles, the way they can take over a game here and there. And the Spurs lost that game in Milwaukee, but had to be really encouraged with the way who was sitting that day, DeJounte and Patty Mills. They still gave him a run, and Lonnie Walker had one of the games of his career.
They played really well on
swish with two bad wrists too.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jeff.
They played well on that road trip aside from the Philly game, but I'm also not surprised that they came home and found themselves in a little bit of a slog against Charlotte. Like I know it sounds like BS or excuses, but I've heard this since the first day I started covering the Spurs. That first game home from a long road trip is always a bear, and it doesn't matter who you're playing, it's almost like the next game of the road trip until you get settled back in at home again. And the Tim, Tony, Manu Spurs, what would have happened last night is they would have come out against Charlotte and played like crap, but just figured out a way to win it in the second half. And this team, it just isn't there yet to where they can play. They can often play one really sluggish half and then just sort of pull it out at the end. So I'm not surprised it was a tough game. It's one of those that great teams, elite teams are going to pull out. Teams like the Spurs in this era where they're pretty good, you're not surprised when they just can't find that button at the end of the game.
The first day you covered the Spurs back in 2007, first day of training camp, someone told you about how hard it was to win the first game.
It was in the orientation packet, yes.
Was it?
Yes.
It? Wow. I didn't realize how comprehensive. An orientation packet.
Yes.
Uh-huh. That's pretty impressive.
Yes. It was that.
He shows up. Hello, my name is Greg Popovich. I'm the head coach. I'll be making your life miserable for the next 14 years. And by the way, the first thing you should know is after a long road trip, the first game back is just like an extension of that road trip.
It wasn't the first thing. It was like the fifth thing on the list. There's also stuff like there's also stuff like don't book an early morning flight. Yeah, don't book an early morning flight the morning after a game. That sort of stuff. But
I didn't realize how much Pop had taught you so quickly.
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, it was a hell of a day.
Where do they sit right now in terms of the rest of this trip? We've mentioned how long, or not the trip, but the homestand. We mentioned how long it is, but to get into specifics, looking here, we have the Clippers led by the player who's all too familiar to the Spurs.
Wait.
Big emotionally, Paul George. Paul George will be in town.
Let me interrupt.
Wednesday and Thursday.
Let me interrupt. I know you know this, but just think about this. The Clippers in the next two games are probably going to start Kawhi Leonard and Marcus Morris.
Wow.
Like how loud can 3,200 people boo is what we're going to find out over those two games.
That's pretty interesting. I think the boos are probably wearing off for both of those guys. Maybe that's really naive of me to say.
Well, there's only 3,200 people, so it's not going to be as what it would have been.
That's true. So you have back-to-back games against the Clippers. I guess the only upside there is the Clippers also have to play back-to-back games. So you're kind of going to be on even footing on the second night, and it's hard for even really good teams to beat the same team on back-to-back nights. So maybe in a way, getting to play the Clippers on back-to-back nights gives you a better chance at a split than you would have in another situation. Who knows? That's the optimistic view there.
I heard a rumor that Kawhi has a perpetually bad knee, and so maybe he'll sit one of those. I don't know where I heard that.
That's been bandied about in some circles. over the years.
Some people are saying.
After that, some people are saying. After that, the Chicago Bulls will have a revenge game against the Spurs on Saturday, followed by 2 games against the Sacramento Kings, who may have traded a player or 2 before they get here. The Atlanta Hawks, the Indiana Pacers, and the Cleveland Cavaliers. That's a lot of games during these 2 weeks of glory. Again, to go back to what we said earlier, you've got to do well there if you have any hope of making that little move up the standings to get you out of that play-in extravaganza. I think, because after that it gets rough. Anybody with anything to add at this point?
No, I don't.
Well, it's been said time and again that, the schedule is brutal. And last night's game, it was a physical, hard-fought game, and it's going to take a little bit to recover from that. It's just, this schedule is crazy. It's just nuts. The more I think about it, it's just really, I don't know how the players union signed off on this. It's just a brutal schedule, especially for the Spurs.
They signed off on it because I think someone pointed out to them that this is how the money is made, and that might be crass. But I mean, they've got to get. They're only getting in 72 games this year. Usually, there's 82. That's a loss of revenue in some form or fashion. And the next TV deal will be bigger. We just saw that with the NFL. Everybody worried about what was going to happen with their deal, and it's the biggest ever. The next NBA media deal will be huge. Everything will turn out, but you got to deliver the content. As Nick Talbot always tells us, we need content, and the games are the content. And to get this done, they wanted to get the season finished before the Olympics. And if you're going to play 72 games and a postseason before the Olympics, this is kind of how it had to happen. And so, it's not an ideal way to pull off a season. And I'm sure the players have legitimate concerns, but I think that this is pretty much how it had to go.
Doesn't make it right, Mike. Doesn't make it right.
Okay. It was pointed out last week, I think was one of the first Spurs Insider podcasts in recent memory, where I neglected to point out all the benefits that the viewers, and I realize they're not viewers or listeners, that they can receive by going to expressnews.com and signing up for the Spurs Nation newsletter. And we've got great specials going on for subscribers. You get all the Jeff Mcdonald, all the Tom Orsborn, everything done by Nick Talbot's great staff and the entire newsroom covering our city. It's a good deal. Go to expressnews.com. Sorry I didn't mention that last week. Still looking for a sponsor. Love to have a sponsor. Our listenership is growing by leaps and bounds every week. We're well into the double digits. Gonna hit triple digits at some point. I think maybe by the end of this homestand. We'll see. But appreciate it. And leave your reviews on the podcast. Rate it. Tell people how much you enjoy this. Always appreciate it.
If we're looking for a sponsor, my neighbor said he'll give us $5.
That could work for a whole season.
I'm just kidding. I don't talk to my neighbors.
That's true. The trade deadline is this week, this Thursday. There has been no action on the LaMarcus Aldridge front. He remains sidelined. Will never play another game for the Spurs as they work to either trade him or buy him out once the trade deadline passes. Does anybody on this podcast expect any move from the franchise that has not made a midseason trade since 2014?
I thought it was a little dubious, like when it first came to light, when Pop first broke the news that they're going to look to move LaMarcus. There was a little reporting out there at the national level that the Spurs could do something within the week, and I just thought that was really dubious. Like that stuff doesn't happen in a week; it happens right at the deadline, if it happens at all. So I think I'm not really surprised he's still on the roster. I think if anything was going to happen, it would happen. When's the deadline? Thursday. It would happen Thursday or in the run up to Thursday. And I'm not sure that's going to happen either. It just seems to me that the teams that want LaMarcus don't think they could use him. Don't really seem to want to give up assets to attract him. They would rather just take their chances and try to sign him. I think if let's just be hypothetical and say if you're Miami, you don't want to give up assets for LaMarcus. You can try to sign him, and if somebody else signs him away from you, it's not the end of the world. So I think that's kind of where that stands. And I've kind of thought from the beginning the buyout seems to be the most likely route. I could be wrong, but I'm certainly not surprised that he's still on the roster at this point.
The only way – go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, it looks more and more likely like it's going to be the buyout market just because, Miami's already made a move. They got Trevor Ariza.
Ariza.
They used their one asset, or I don't know if I want to call it an asset at that point, that contract to move that a second-round pick to get him. And, and that's kind of what you're going to get with LaMarcus is, a second-round pick. It's not – so and Danny Ainge went out there and said he's looking at more likely to use the trade exception in the offseason. That might be a bluff. It may not be a bluff, but I'm looking more likely that it's going to be a buyout. You just read, all these everything from reporters from the other markets, and it just doesn't seem there's enough interest in giving up assets, and so LaMarcus is probably going to move on with a buyout. But shocking things can happen at the trade deadline, so we'll see.
The rationale for trading for him and the way that the trade would happen, and I also think that it's unlikely. But this is not only true for LaMarcus, but also for guys like Andre Drummond, whoever else is out there who's up for grabs and is a possibility to be bought out. It's not the team that trades for him is not going to be the one most likely to sign him after the buyout. Like, let's use Jeff's example and say that Miami thinks they're going to be able to sign LaMarcus once he's bought out. Like, that's where LaMarcus wants to go. Well, if there's a team that wants LaMarcus and doesn't think that he would sign with them on the buyout market, and they want to keep him from that team, that's the team that would decide to give up an asset to trade for him at the last minute. I saw that in regards to Drummond, where the Charlotte Hornets might have interest in Drummond, and they know that if Drummond is bought out, he's not going to sign with Charlotte. So maybe that incentivizes Charlotte to make a trade for Andre Drummond to not only secure his rights but also to keep him away from a competitor. That would be the way that it would unfold there at the deadline with LaMarcus. I'm not sure who that team would be, but that would be the hope that the Spurs could get a little something for him. And again, as we've said for the past couple of weeks, this isn't a franchise-changing trade for the Spurs. They're not going to get a star. They're not going to get a first-round pick for him. Anything they get is kind of icing on the cake, whether it's a second-round pick, whatever. But I think going into Thursday, the most likely outcome is still just he's bought out, he moves on, and the Spurs do too. But I don't think anybody else, the other upcoming free agents for the Spurs, DeMar DeRozan, Patty Mills, Rudy Gay, Trey Lyles, I would be surprised if they're not all still around on Friday.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree. Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think this is a team that is looking to shake things up. A, because they rarely do, and B, because they're building something that looks all of a sudden it looks like they have a direction and a way to go. So I think they're going to ride this out and see how far it'll take them this season.
How, as the Spurs historian here, is the guy who's been around for years and years, I'm just curious, what year was the last year the Spurs won an NBA title?
That would be 2014, sir.
Okay. Question 2. What was the last year they made a midseason trade?
That would also be 2014, sir.
Do you believe in cause and effect?
I do.
So clearly the answer here is trade somebody.
To trade for Austin Day. The answer is to trade for Austin Day.
Yes.
I don't know what Brian Wright is doing right now, but he should be on the phone first trying to locate Austin Day wherever he is, and then try to trade for him.
I think first you have to acquire Nando De Colo as that bait for Austin
Oh
Day.
boy,
it really is an amazing.
That's why this gets.
It really is
complicated.
an amazing. Not even a statistic, but just the idea that of how few times over the years the Spurs have done this. Every year the NBA trade deadline is crazy, and the Spurs just do not participate traditionally.
So I've been
when they do, it's for Austin Day.
I've been covering them since the 07-08 season. There were 3 in-season trades. The first one was they sent Brent Berry to Seattle for Kurt Thomas. Yeah. Then Brent Berry was bought out and re-signed in San Antonio. The second one was like Theo Ratliff for a draft pick to Charlotte, and then the Austin Day Nando De Colo trade. So it's been 3 of them in however many years that was, and the only one that really was made with an eye towards improving the team for that season was the first one, to bring in Kurt Thomas for basically nothing, because you got Brent Berry back on the team and had basically the same roster plus Kurt Thomas. So it's not, they're not a team that makes big. They've always believed in continuity and, you've heard all the buzzwords, corporate knowledge and blah. They don't want to have to change a bunch of stuff on the fly.
That was orientation like lesson number 2.
Yes. Nazir Muhammad was a few years before that, right?
It was before that, yes. 05.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so 05, that led to a championship. I mean, it's clearly
true. It's true.
All they need to do is make a midseason trade, and here comes the Larry O'Brien Trophy.
And this one's a little different in that you have a player who you are actively trying to move, and everyone knows it. So maybe something gets done for reasons that you mentioned, but I'm still skeptical.
Yeah. We haven't talked much about just the specifics of this team right now and what it's looking like, and this was true on the road trip, and it was. I think it's a trend growing over the past several weeks. We talked all last year, and probably as long as we've been doing this podcast, about the idea of DeJounte Murray and Derek White playing together. What's the future of this backcourt going to be? They are finally in kind of a rhythm now where everybody's healthy and they're coexisting, and it seems like something that is going to be positive. Not just this year, for the future. That's working. Keldon Johnson's working. You're seeing some stuff from Lonnie Walker, from Devin Vassell. What do you guys think just about this?
And since our last podcast, they've also got DeMar DeRozan back.
Right.
So that's been helpful too, I think. The young core,
is a DeJounte Murray, Derek White, now that we've seen it, not only in spurts, but over a few games, and as we've watched it kind of grow a little bit, is that a backcourt, regardless of whether DeMar DeRozan comes back or not, is that a backcourt that can be a winning one for a franchise over the next several years, do you think?
I really don't see why not. I mean, clearly it's a very good defensive backcourt. Yeah. Yeah. And DeJounte is becoming a pretty reliable offensive weapon, not from the 3-point line, but from almost everywhere else. As long as Derek White continues to expand his 3-point game and be consistent with it, I think that's definitely a backcourt that can get some stuff done.
Yeah, their whole identity is trending toward defense, and it starts with those two guys. And then Vassell's he's probably on the path to become a pretty darn good defender as well. So that just seems to be their whole identity, or where it's trending.
In the NBA, you don't do the 40 minutes of hell, the nonstop pressing like happens in college every now and then, but it can happen in spurts. And when it does, wasn't that kind of the way the Spurs got back into the Chicago game? They just unleashed those guys as defenders. DeJounte, Derek. I can't remember if Devin was on the floor or not. But
Devin was, yeah.
Chicago's on the second night of a back-to-back, and Pop decided, okay, to get back into this game, we're just gonna press and make it difficult on another team. And that's not something that can work every night. That's not something that you do for an entire game. But that's absolutely a weapon for this team. I think moving forward, where you can unleash those guys.
It's become their go-to almost when things are kind of going poorly. They did that against Orlando when they had that first game at home with the fans and started off kind of sluggishly and in a hole. I think they were down 13 or something, and they cranked up that full court press and got back in the game and won going away. They did that in the Chicago game you mentioned. Against Charlotte, they were down 10 going to the second quarter. Did that to start the second quarter, and like within 4 possessions, we're back within 1 point. Obviously, that comeback didn't hold, but that seems to be their sort of MO now when they want to change things up or get some things going. I think you see it when they've been sluggish on both ends. I think Pop will go to that, and it just forces up the intensity. Like if you're going to play a full court press, you've got to be, pardon my French, balls to the wall. And I just think it increases the intensity on both ends for them. So that's been an interesting development too in this period, is that's become their sort of go-to when things aren't going well, and it's been pretty productive for them in those situations.
Well, that's an upbeat thing as we hit the end of this edition.
You don't want to talk about how Lonnie
Insider.
Walker went from 31 points to 9 minutes in consecutive games?
No, we're nearing the end here, and we always like to think about the better things in the world, the better things in life, and accentuate the positive.
Patty says they're right on the doorstep. They're right on the doorstep. Yep.
They're right on the doorstep. Not sure which house he's talking about.
Yeah.
Whether it's one they want to go inside or whether it's one they want to stay away from, but that's good. Yeah. We'll close this by thinking that
Santa Ana's Army, man. Santa Ana's Army was right on the doorstep once.
Again, you're taking the totally wrong approach I'm going for here. I try to end this positively, and you always try to ruin it, and I'm sick of it. But anyway.
I brought you to the dark side.
Let's get back to the roses.
Finally
smelling the roses. Yes. Thinking about how after the Alamo, Texas won its independence at the Battle of San Jacinto, and the rest was history. Maybe there can be glory like that at the end of this for the local Cagers. Regardless of what happens on the basketball court, there are good things to think about. And so in the meantime, I implore everyone, despite what Jeff tells you, despite how this polarizing man tries to bring you down, take care of each other and keep it real.